Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 0407, and in this video I'm going to make a point that I believe is long overdue, and that I believe, for me anyway, it seems to make sense, seems to be a common sense situation. But for a lot of people who, tend to deal with issues of gender and things of that nature, seem not to be able to understand this, and the topic of it seems to be politicized. Not only that, the subject in question seems to get a lot of bad reputations as a result of being associated with far right politics or religious fundamentalism or what have you. But I'm not here to discuss that. Rather, I'm here to say that anti-feminism is not the same as being anti-woman. That the two are separate, and as John the Other, I think, pointed out some of that, being opposed to an ideology is not the same as being opposed to a biological demographic. And I'm saying that being opposed to an ideology is not the same as being opposed to a biological demographic, not even close. And it's not even the same as arguing the merits of equality either. And therefore, saying that you oppose feminism, that you are critical of feminism, is not the same as saying that you're opposed to equality between men and women at all. And while myself personally, I tend to be very cynical about the idea of equality. I tend to distrust the notion of equality. I think equality is unachievable, and I think that we've done a lot of we've wasted a lot of time. Really, we've wasted a lot of time in the Western world constantly trying to pursue this unending quest for equality, when the term itself isn't even fully or clearly defined. That it could be defined in any number of ways. Um, and this search for it seems to have caused us a lot of problems. We seem to just completely upset the social order itself just for the purpose of trying to acquire this thing. And to me, it's been a complete failure. But that being said, I do favor, at least at least for pragmatic reasons anyway, legal equality for various people. I think such a thing is not entirely without merit to one degree or another, for no other reason than the fact that it makes society more peaceful, hopefully. But as far as how this relates to women, as that is, as far as how this relates to various ideologies, and in this instance, feminism. Um, I don't believe that feminism has ever had any real merit. I don't believe that feminism has ever, I don't believe that there's ever really been a rational, objective critique of feminism that has not been related to something such as the idea that it's going to destroy the family or what have you. Instead, I think the idea that women, should have a place in politics or whatever, it's not an old one. And if you go back far enough, you find that there was even conservative arguments for women being involved in politics. That was the idea that women would be a more moral segment of the population. This was argued for why they should have the right to vote. The idea behind them having the right to vote was that they would vote for more conservative policies, such as, say, temperance, and that kind of thing. And then that evolved into something else completely. And therefore, those are the kind of arguments for women being involved in politics. And there's always been this idea that feminism, most conservative people don't like feminism, not because they don't like women, for example, but because they think that, some of them even seem to think that, feminism or equality for women and men and women is just bad for women themselves, or that women seem to get the. So it's all kind of, and this is something that, like, say, Barbarossa and other, MGTOW types have pointed out, that it's really a gynocentric worldview itself. And therefore, but see, the real reason I'm here right now discussing this is a simple reality, that I see within feminism a great moral hazard that is something that is simply not discussed by people, because the idea of this idea, for example, that women cannot be violent, cannot be bad. It's something where you can understand intellectually. You can understand intellectually that women can be violent, that they can be bad, that they can do bad. But we don't really realize this in an immediate sense. We don't understand, for example, that there is some evidence that suggests that women can be actually more violent in some instances than men, and this has been pointed out by people. We don't have a conscience of this. The reason we don't have a conscience of this is because this still comes from essentially patriarchal view of womanhood, which is what, ironically enough, was what feminists to varying degrees have been opposed to. They were initially opposed to the idea that women were soft, sensitive, loving, and caring. This is what they thought sexism was initially, and they wanted to point out that women were not like this at all. Now, it's this patriarchal view of womanhood, which is not the way women actually are, largely led to feminism in the first place, and then from there it's led to the monster that we have today. And it seems to me that in the third wave of feminism that there seems to be a contradiction in which they want all of the freedoms that are associated with this assumption that they are not like this, but all the privilege associated with the idea that they are like this. And the two seem to interact with each other. And feminism in the third wave seems to be just nothing but, a perpetual, try to protect the females at all costs. What I think it was Bob Rosa who described it as being a, female advocacy at all cost movement or something like that. But my point is that I don't see feminism as being a movement that has ever been about equality between men and women, because if it was, we would just call it gender egalitarianism or something. We wouldn't call it feminism. It's the femina that is the key in feminism. And I also believe that at the core, besides being, for example, a movement that is based on, that has been created by females, for females, that's female-oriented, and that strives to get certain things for females and takes a variety of forms in order to achieve that. It's also, I think, defined, I think I would define it, or rather I see the core of feminism as being an opposition to men, to maleness, to masculinity, but to the male half of the human species. I see feminism as being a form of gender tribalism. That what it does and what it strives to do is to acquire certain things for women, that sees women as different from men. And a lot of this is divisive because the fact of the matter is males and females are the same. That is, we are not the same in a little physiological or even psychological sense, but that we are two halves of the human species. We don't exist without the other doesn't exist without us. We come together for the purposes of procreation, that we effectively need each other at the very least for the purposes of procreation, at least for now, until at some point we create an artificial womb, or women create artificial insemination, which I guess they already kind of have, or what have you. But we've evolved as a species that needs each other. We're a sexually dimorphic species, and we come together for the purposes of procreation. The idea that the two are different is a false product, a false consciousness of the modern world we live in. It's not something that would occur in nature. Therefore, the very basis of a feminism is flawed. But its opposition to men, I think, believes to, and this is why I wanted to create this video, because I felt like after I did my second last video, I think it needs to be pointed out that there needs to be a section to discuss this, because I did discuss this in my last video in the description box a little bit, that feminism should not be above, beneath, or beyond criticism today, because I think what is shown in the second to last video is that feminism seems to appeal to a certain type of psychologically disturbed woman, that certain psychologically disturbed women seem to be attracted to feminism, and its fundamental opposition to men can lead, if it's taken to its logical conclusion. Now, I'm not saying that feminism is a hate movement, but what I am saying is that feminism, when taken to its most logical conclusion, can lead to hate of men, lead to the justification of violence against men, and so on and so forth. This is the point here. And this is why feminism needs to be critiqued or criticized, or at the very least, if we agree that feminism should exist, or agree that women should be involved in the day-to-day runnings of society, that they should be involved in these things, that we have to start looking at feminism, we have to start looking at females, and we have to start looking at at aspects of the female psychology differently. So we can look at male psychology, for example. We can assume that men are inclined to be violent, all these other things. But we don't look at, for example, violent women. We don't look at aspects of the female psychology that can contribute to that. And we don't look at, for example, how feminism, particularly in its modern form, seems to enable bad female behavior. Women. See, the thing about feminism is feminism personalizes the political, or rather, politicizes the personal. And this idea of politicizing the personal means that any female who's had a problem with her father, let's say, ends up associating all of the worst traits of her father with all men. All men are bad, and it becomes a situation in which she can justify bitter hatred of men, bitter anger against men, masculinity, and the like. And like I said, this creates a moral hazard because the whole society tells her that she is justified in feeling that way. She is justified in feeling anger at men, even if it's not, even if all men are great people. Thus, feminism judges all men collectively as opposed to individually, as human beings, assessing them and their individual character and that sort of thing. So, but since we can't actually discuss this, since the assumption that all men and women are basically the same psychologically or what have you, we can't even really get to a point where we can discuss or critique women. We can't even, because feminism protects women. It insulates women from criticism, insulates itself from criticism. And what I'm saying, and why I wanted to create a separate video to discuss this in more detail, is that this needs to come to an end. If anything should freak you out, should really disturb you about my second to last video, is that these females were clearly feminist leaning, radical feminist leaning. There's no denying this. But the fact is that they weren't even really talking as feminists. They didn't even really mention feminism that much. What should disturb you is the fact that they were talking as girls. They were talking as young girls. And they seem to have these ideas so ingrained in their thinking that it was almost second nature the way they were writing. One of them even mentioned her mother as being in favor of these things. Now, if this doesn't disturb you, then either we as a society have become very pathological and we're disconnected from violence. We've been, we don't understand anymore. If this doesn't disturb you. Furthermore, it must show some level of a pathology that we regard men. We don't see men as having any problems of their own. That they can't be victims of sexual violence. But this is what should really disturb you. This is what should really freak you out. And if you're not bothered by this, then hell, I don't know what I can tell you. And this is the thing. This is probably the primary point. I'm not per se bothered by the idea of women getting involved in politics or what have you. My problem is a simple reality of this moral hazard that seems to be apparent to me. And if we agree, for example, that women should be more involved in the running of affairs, that they should have more responsibilities, then we need to start holding them accountable as adults. We don't do that. We simply don't do that. And it's not even a product of biology. It's not something per se ingrained in the female psyche. I believe women can be held responsible as adults, alongside men. It's a simple fact that we don't socialize girls this way. Whatever you believe on this subject, we don't really socialize girls that way. We don't really socialize girls to see themselves as agents, as actors, upon the world, the way we raise boys to. And so we need to start raising females to take responsibility. And feminism insulates girls from criticism, insulates girls from responsibility. And feminism then insulates itself from criticism or responsibility. And this is the main point of what I'm going to say. And I'm going to end this. I don't want to make this a very long video. I did some rough drafts before this that were kind of long, and I don't really want to go into full detail on this. And I will probably dedicate as another video to my views on feminism. But this is just a point that I wanted to make that I believe is very important. So I'm going to end here, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.